Loom bag. Loom bag can mean only one thing. Welcome back to Tools and Track. It's time to deal with wires. This part of the list is actually going to be quite a lot of things because whilst I could easily plug this loom in and start the car, there's going to be safety concerns and neatness concerns. The safety concerns are valid because at some point this will have to go through an IVA and I don't really want to deal with the loom twice. I'd be as well doing it right first time. And the neatness concerns is because I know a Daniel and he is an electrical type and I won't get away with doing anything if it's not neat. So for the moment, the first step with this loom is to lay it all out and see where everything's probably going to have to live. After that, we need to see how it's going to live forever. So apologies for the debris in the form of paperwork. There's been some math here, but this is the loom now in. That's the transit block, which will probably tidy this all up with new stuff and put up here so that it goes through here and into that plug and that ECU. Is it all it needs? No. Obviously it's not going to be that simple, and that's because of the blue plug. Because the blue plug is not simply a case of a loom that goes to here and allows all things to start. It is in fact all of this shit, isn't it? Yes. Now I did do, I did do an exercise of trying to summarise this somewhat, but we have fuse boxes, a whole load of other stuff, and crucially, immobiliser. Which is something I was very reluctant to go deleting or messing with at all. Hence all of this remaining. But I am getting braver, so we are going to try and get rid of all of this and start making a fresh loom for all the rest that's tailor fitted to a Locost. And here's the math I've done to work that one out. So things that are not included in my ECU and plug loom are alternator, obviously, and starter motor. Two fairly chunky wires that are sort of separate from all this. However, there's a feed here because the alternator, two wires of which has to be reported into the ECU, and the starter motor has to go through this plug, kind of, and into that loom for the key to do the thing. So, this is what's called a PCM pinout, and it is every single plug that is in the ECU, what its colour code is, and what it does. As you can imagine, there is multitudes of it. However, it is laid out in a fashion that makes it nice and simple. The only thing that's missing from there is this. Now this is the pinout for the immobiliser. Now don't worry internet, I'm not telling people how to steal an MX-5. I am retaining the immobiliser. So what we need to do is take all of this wiring, make it and plug it in through this plug into this. Now the very good news is the only plug that goes into this is one wire, and that is the red and the black from the ECU. Everything else kind of does its own wee thing. There's like earths and there's power things for various functions, but the ECU only needs one wire. Now, you would think, surely if it's on one wire, you can just run a live. No, that ECU wire is a signal wire. It's a set amount of pulses that has to go from that immobiliser and go to the ECU to say, yes, you can now start the car. Now, that code is read by the coil immobiliser, which is housed in the column. That sits next to the key where the key was in. So two wires need to go to that. One goes to an earth, there's an LED involved to flash and go, look, this car's got an immobiliser, and nothing else. So surely this must be a fairly easy thing for me to strip out of all of the extra debris loom and make work with a nice summarised one of these. This man actually does electrical stuff properly, professionally.
It should be easy.
It should be easy, and yet.
No, it's a lot. Once you strip this back and get it all taken back and figure out where it actually runs in this, it'll make a lot more sense. That's good, but seeing it in this is also helpful. So
So, step one, strip all of my lovely green tape back off. You do love green tape.
Just this, why is it so much?
There was many things I was scared to remove in case it did things. So what we're going to do is take that specific thing out and all the wiring associated to it, figure out where it goes related to this and that, and get rid of absolutely everything else. There's something very familiar about all of this. Wiring. Right.
Yes.
We've done a lot of math. Daniel, you can hold the camera. I've done a lot of this in my own head. Daniel's cross-checked it, but I feel the need, given how much I hate bodywork and how much I hate electricals, to say, I've sussed this, it was me. Right, anyway, enough blowing my own trumpet. So what we've got, as we discussed earlier on, we need to do a starter and alternator. Now the good part is, grey and red and grey both go to the fuse box, both go to the ECU, colours don't change, that's fine, we'll replicate that. There's also going to have to be a big black wire that goes from the battery to the starter direct. Through the starter, there's a 100 amp fuse in the fuse box which goes to the alternator. We'll duplicate that.
Yeah.
Then the alternator has a white and a red wire that goes to the ignition key. That is all of the power for all of this comes through that white and red wire. So we need to keep that, right? There's also another white and red wire, but we don't need to worry about that. My big problem has been the ignition key, which was sussed out with Mazda wiring diagrams. Ignition key has 3 wires that I couldn't identify. Now obviously we've got 1 wire I could work out. That white and black wire, that's the kicker for the starter. So that's when the key goes to the position where it doesn't lock in. That turns on the start motor, fine. We've got a black and a red, which goes to the fuse box. That's that is running, that is the key. When it goes back to on position, powers this. I've checked the wiring diagram and it will power literally nothing that I need. It only powers radio, cigar, like loads of crap that's
washer, motors, and yeah.
We won't have that, and if we do, we're going to wire it separate, so we can ignore the black and the red. Our black and our white is accessory plus. Now that powers up everything on one position.
Yeah, the first click.
The first click. Now that is also useless, but I'm going to retain this black and white wire because it might be useful for certain things. We'll keep it because it's handy to have. My big wire that I must keep is the blue wire. That goes to a fuse box, and that's what's called the prime, well, it's actually called the main. So big fuse, powers everything, things like, you know, lights, blah, 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 blah.
ECU, fuel pump relay.
Primarily ECU and fuel pump relay. We need to keep that. Now, I am not keeping the fuel pump relay wiring. We're going to do that separate because the fuel pump wiring is now completely different to what it would have been in the MX-5. But this blue wire is what turns the ECU on. So we need to keep that. We're going to keep all this as well. But now I know what everything does, I can finally cut that
can
off.
Go. That can go.
I'm still though.
No, it's fine, it's fine.
Oh, it's a big step, it's a big step. But we've mapped it, which means that if things don't work, I'll know what I've done wrong. I was very reluctant in phase 1 of summarising this loom to chop in without working it out. And the reason being, if you click one wire apart and the car doesn't start, you're like, what have I done? Doing this is essential when you're starting this process because you need to know what mistakes you're potentially making. But I don't think we're making any. I think this is going to make sense.
No, I mean we know every single colour on this plug now does.
Yeah.
So all we're doing is just going through the whole process of elimination until we're left with the stuff we actually need.
Yeah. So now it's time
Snip, snip.
to chop. Are you feeling confused? Fused, get it? Now that I have all of the loom stripped down and we've got something resembling where it all needs to sit, we know what needs to be rejoined, but I can't just rejoin it and turn the key, because if I've done something wrong, which I probably have, it's all going to let the smoke out. That's because I've deleted the fuse box and we have no safety in this whatsoever. So what I need to work out is how to reinstigate a more user-friendly fuse box, i.e. one that's not pre-wired for 3 million fuses that I won't need in the car. So we're going to have to buy a fuse box and a relay box. Now, there's going to be some caveats with this, because as I have mapped out, whilst we don't need a lot of fuses, we still do have a minimum amount. Plus, I want to give myself a little bit of expansion should we decide that I want heated seats somewhere down the line. What we do need is 2 gangs within this fuse box. So as you can see from here, all of this, there's a 100 amp fuse here and a 60 amp fuse there. They will be integral. We've got to retain that as part of the safety system. We also want to have a gangway on here that does not need the key to start. Now, as you can see, there's a whole level of fuses that go down to the key, which then turns on and runs the whole thing, right? But the ones above it don't have a key. They must be live at all times. Now, they're going to power things like the brake lights, because even if the car turns off, I have to have brake lights that work. They also need to turn on the indicators, because if the car breaks down and I turn the key off, we still must have flashers. Also, it's got to do a couple other things potentially, but, well, the 60 amp, which must always work, because without it the key won't work. It's got to be a circle. Anyway, it'll make sense, but what I now need to do, that I've worked that out, is get a 4 relay and a 12 fuse minimum box. So that's going to be more likely a 5 or a 6 relay and up to maybe a 20 amp. I'll see what options I've got and get something ordered. But really, until I do that, I can't go any further, because we can't connect in without fuses. But it's looking near. Right, having stripped this now down as far as it needs to go and trying to organise things and make it look neat, we've got all of our principal king leads, i.e. the big thick lives that need to go to various places plumbed in, and I'm still waiting on a fuse box. So I don't want to do fuses, but what I did think I'd try is stuff that's not really going to cause me problems with a fuse, i.e. sussing out the key. Now, all I'm going to do here is run a quick live to the starter to see if that works, and that'll tell me that this is getting powered right. Starter works, obviously, and it starts me off on building. Now, I'm using these horrible little things. That's temporary. Obviously, we're not doing that. This is kind of going to be where the fuse box will become. So it does help when you're pinning out and designing the loom to just quickly put these together with this. It means that you're not kind of uncrimping things and shortening the loom. You can just give it a quick nip. So this will be phase 1 of a whole loom bit. But of course, has it worked? Yes. Yes, it has. Excellent. As you can see, I'm literally running out of board space. I've had to move the PCM pin out over here for what's probably going to be a permanent location. So I've got more board space. But anyway, Patreon donations at good use. Loom tape, this is the fabric stuff, which is actually quite durable and decent for engine bays. So probably need a good scud of that for doing what we're going to do. Also, we have one fuse box with a significant amount of fuses. That's good. Going to have to learn how it works. Doesn't obviously come with anything in the way of instructions, but has the terminals. I'm kind of hoping I can use these as bus bars, but I've got a funny feeling not. Anyway, don't worry about that, we'll come to that. We'll also have, and allegedly these clip together, but I don't really know how, a relay box with 4 relays. Now, I seem to recall many moons ago, I bought a relay box and did the fuel pump wiring with it. Can I find it? Can I buggery? So I might have to also order some relays. But it does look like this has a good deal of versatility to it, because naturally, you can terminate the bottom of these and put the mad wee doobadas in it. Give me 5 minutes to learn how to do wiring, and then we can actually start making a loom up. This is exciting. I say it's exciting, it's going to take me 3 runs of this to make it look neat. Now that reminds me, the other day we test cranked the engine. I don't think there's oil in it. We're going to have to deal with the fluids. I did note when we put the diff in that we haven't filled that up, and I'm fairly sure by this point there's nothing in the gearbox either, so a little order for all of the liquids is pending. We're getting close to being able to wire this loom for good. Now, I've done a few things, mapped a few bits out. The obvious thing is to put the engine loom through here, because it doesn't really go through anywhere else. I did consider putting it through the scuttle, but I've got lots of bars and it's just not going to look as neat. It's going to be in the way of feet. That's where it needs to go through. Now, what I also considered was, if we take the fancy new fuse box, which I've found some relays for, it would look very, very neat if it went straight above it. Now, logic would dictate we can put a bonnet over it, it's going to be good, we're accessible, it keeps all the loom close to each other and such. However, I went away and had to think about this for a couple of days, and I'm not going to do that. You don't know about this yet, but here's why. So I want this to be disconnectable and easily, well, I say easy removable. It needs to be able to come out of all of this. So if I was to put a loom through here and splice through the back of a fuse box and into the fuse box, I would need to actually disconnect the entire fuse box to get it off of there and get the engine loom out. That's going to make things prohibitively restrictive, so I don't think we're going to do that. Instead, the fuse box is going to live in the car, more than likely there.
Yeah.
It's going to be slightly behind the dash, but still reasonably accessible that I can change fuses. Now, the logic with this is that steering wheel line's pretty much where the dashboard line's going to go. So sitting there, if we move, probably a wee bit down,
Yeah, you can put it there. Yeah.
Bear in mind, this is a functional race car. It doesn't need to have a stereo or anything in it. We just want to make sure it's going to run very, very quick all the time. So accessing the fuse easies and then accessing the relays behind it, slightly more difficult. The chances of these failing are low compared to a fuse popping. So I think this is where it's going to go. So what that gives me is, we're going to have this loom coming through here, so we can easily splice from this loom down to here, and I think the ECU is more than likely going to hide up there to the other side of it. Now that's good, we've got nice easy routes, we're probably not even going to have to extend a lot of wires. So having that templated, I can now move this scuttle the right out the way, because it's just getting in the way at the moment, because we know what needs to happen with it. What have I missed? The fact that regardless of that, that fuse box is still going to have to pass through the bulkhead. I don't really know how we're going to get around this. The only other option I've got is if the fuse box lives here, but we're still going to have to pass things through.
Well, why don't we just put a connector right here?
That's what I was thinking. But what we're doing there is adding a hell of a lot of work.
No, that's all right.
Is it?
Ah, that's fine. What is it you're more likely to need to disconnect? The engine side or disconnect it from the scuttle side?
Well, realistically, we're probably going to have to disconnect it from the engine side, because it's only if the engine's ever coming out.
Yeah.
Therefore, a loom connector here. The sensible approach to this would be making sure all of this chod doesn't exist here.
Yeah.
So that way we're not connecting unnecessary wires. Disregard the scuttle completely. Get this wired so that it runs the engine, and then consider how we make it neat.
Yeah. So you want this swap under here?
Somewhere. Yeah, what we're looking at here is the rabbit hole that I said I wasn't going to go down. But the reason why I've now unsheathed all of this loom and I'm starting it wire by wire is because I've got a fighting chance. What we've done is sensibly and systematically stripped out all the wiring we don't need. So all of this is still ECU to MISC nonsense, fresh air, but I've kept them labelled just in case. So what remains is purely engine loom. From that, we've got a couple of splices off, as I was wanting, so the key would just work the engine loom. Still to come, obviously, a couple of main lives, a couple of tweaks here and there, and fundamentally a fuse box, but realistically, that's going to have to be in the next episode because you guys are probably asleep by now. So for all those who have just found this because you have some strange kink and you like wiring, please be sure to do the like, bell and subscribe thing because, you know, clearly there's going to be more of it. If you want to support more on that, patreon.com/toolsandtrack because, you know, it's awesome. And until next weekend, guys, drive safe.